My son, Ethan, delivered his verdict on my life with the casual cruelty of a stranger, and in that moment, the world I had so carefully cultivated for 70 years tilted on its axis. He told me I was a relic, a living antique, too slow and too fragile for his streamlined, upwardly mobile world. He called me a liability. The words, uttered in the warm, familiar air of my own living room, the room where I had nursed his fevers, applauded his report cards, and wiped his tears, seemed to warp the very light, casting long, unfamiliar shadows that danced like specters in the corners of my vision. He said it with such finality, as if he were closing a business ledger, not shattering a life. With the chilling efficiency of an accountant balancing his books, he had me checked into a care facility, taking possession of my home and my history as if my name were already carved on a cool slab of granite. He painted a picture of me to others, and perhaps most importantly, to himself, of a confused, fading woman, a tragic but necessary story he could neatly close the book on and place on a high shelf to gather dust. But what happens when the character in the story refuses to follow the script? What happens when the silence he so easily mistakes for submission is actually the quiet, patient hum of a clock, counting down to an ending he never could have conceived? He thought he could make me vanish. He thought my story was over. He had forgotten who taught him how to read in the first place. My independence had always been my armor, forged in the fires of grief and tempered by the steel of time. For 2 decades after my husband David passed, my life was a tapestry woven with my own hands, rich with color and texture. It was a life of purpose. My mornings started not with a pill organizer, but with the scent of damp earth and the sweet perfume of the Queen Elizabeth roses that climbed the trellis by the porch. That garden was my kingdom, a riot of defiant life that was the envy of the neighborhood. I knew the name of every perennial, the exact moment to prune the hydrangeas to ensure a cascade of blue blooms, the precise, acidic needs of the stubborn peonies that had been my mother's. My hands, though wrinkled, were strong from tilling soil and pulling weeds. This was not the life of a feeble woman. On Tuesdays, I volunteered at the public library, mending the torn pages of children's books. On Thursdays, I hosted my book club, the Literary Ladies, we called ourselves, 4 women who had navigated widowhood and life's storms together, our bond fortified by decades of shared reading and cheap Chardonnay. My life had a comfortable, self-sufficient rhythm. I was not, by any measure, a woman in decline. My relationship with Ethan had once been the central pillar of my existence. After David's death, he was all I had. I remembered his childhood with a clarity that felt painful now, the smell of his hair after a bath, the fierce pride in his eyes when he finally learned to ride his bike, the weight of him in my arms as he slept. But things began to change when Chloe entered his life. She was beautiful, ambitious, and possessed a social grace that was both dazzling and predatory. At first, I was happy for him. But then came the subtle shifts. The way she would gently correct a story I was telling, smiling sweetly as she cut me off. The expensive gifts that felt less like offerings of love and more like markers of a lifestyle I couldn't provide. "Oh, Evelyn, that old thing," she'd once said of my faithful percolator. "Ethan, we simply must get you a proper espresso machine for when we visit." They were small things, tiny erosions of my place in my own son's heart, which I had foolishly ignored. Then came the fall. A single, momentary dizzy spell in the kitchen, a brief, frightening moment of darkness that swept over me as I reached for a jar of flour from the top shelf, became the single crack in my armor he needed to pry the whole thing open. I had chalked it up to forgetting lunch and the oppressive humidity of a Carolina August, but for Ethan, it was a golden opportunity, a key to a door he had long and, secretly, wanted to unlock. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in psychological warfare, a campaign of 1,000 tiny cuts, so subtle I barely registered it at the time as a coordinated attack. I thought I was simply becoming forgetful, that age was finally catching up to me. The gaslighting was insidious. My favorite reading glasses would vanish from the nightstand, only to have Ethan find them a day later in the refrigerator. "See, Mom," he would say gently, his voice laced with a theatrical sorrow. "This is what we're worried about. What if you'd put them in the oven?" Another day, Chloe would help me organize my pantry, and later that evening, I'd find the salt mixed in with the sugar container, ruining a batch of cookies for my book club and making me feel utterly incompetent and foolish. "Oh, Mom, it's okay," he'd said, patting my hand as I stared at the ruined dough. "We all have moments like this." They were building a case, brick by insidious brick, not for a court, but for their own consciences and for the story they were methodically spinning to the outside world. The whispers to my neighbors grew louder, evolving from casual mentions of my forgetfulness into veiled, serious concerns about my fading memory and episodes of confusion. My friend Eleanor from the book club later told me that Chloe had taken her aside, her eyes filled with crocodile tears, saying how they were exploring options for my safety. Then came the proposal of the celebratory lunch, the final act of their breathtaking deception. "You need a real break, Mom," Ethan insisted, his smile stretched thin across his face, a painful grimace that didn't quite reach his hollow, evasive eyes. "Let us spoil you for a day. No cooking, no cleaning, just pure relaxation. You've earned it." Trust is a fragile thing, an heirloom passed down through generations of love, and mine, though cracked and chipped by the preceding weeks, was not yet shattered. I trusted my only son. I trusted the boy whose scraped knees I had kissed and whose childhood nightmares I had soothed with whispered lullabies. The car ride was a blur of cheerful, meaningless chatter, a deliberate smokescreen of anecdotes about work promotions and friends' lavish vacations, all designed to keep me from asking the one question that mattered: where are we actually going? The destination was not a restaurant. It was a sprawling brick building set far back from the road, with perfectly manicured lawns that seemed sterile and unwelcoming. The sign, rendered in a soft, inoffensive font, read, "Willow Creek Senior Living." My heart began a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs, a deep thud of primal fear. "What is this place, Ethan?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It's a wonderful facility, Mom," he said, his voice relentlessly, brutally cheerful as he unbuckled his seatbelt. "The best in the state. They have doctors on staff, great activities. We just want you to get evaluated, get some proper rest. It's what's best. Just for a little while," he promised as he guided me through the automatic doors that hissed open to reveal a sterile, beige lobby that smelled of disinfectant and quiet desperation. His hug felt more like a cage than an embrace. His words were a balm meant to soothe a wound he was actively digging deeper. For some rest and observation. Chloe's kiss was a cold, glossy stamp on my cheek, leaving behind the faint, cloying scent of her expensive perfume. Then they turned, a handsome, concerned couple, walked back through the doors that slid shut behind them with a soft, final hiss, and my world went utterly and completely silent. The carefully constructed reality of my life had just been revealed as a stage set, and I had been left alone in the dark after the actors had taken their bows and gone home to my house. The room they assigned me was a sterile, impersonal box. It smelled of bleach and regret. It was beige, the color of surrender. It had no history, no soul, just a bed with a plastic-covered mattress, a dresser, and a single chair facing a window that overlooked a parking lot. When I asked a passing nurse, a stout woman with a name tag that read Brenda, if I could please use a phone to call my son, she gave me that placid, dismissive smile that I would come to learn was a professional barrier against human emotion. "All in good time, dear," she chirped, her voice dripping with condescension. "You need to get some rest now. Let's not get agitated." Agitated. The word hung in the air, a diagnosis in itself. My insistence that I was fine, that there was a terrible mistake, was met with that deep, soul-crushing pity reserved for the delusional. Later, Brenda returned with a clipboard, showing me the intake forms. And there it was, a nightmare in black and white, my name, his signature. Boxes were ticked for medical consent, residential admission, and long-term observation. He hadn't just dropped me off for a rest. He had legally signed me away like a piece of unwanted luggage. I collapsed onto the hard mattress of that foreign bed. My hands were clasped in my lap, but I couldn't stop the tremor that ran through my entire body, a seismic shock of betrayal that threatened to tear me apart. They thought they had won. They thought the story was over. But sometimes, the most dangerous character is the one everyone assumes is already dead. The days that followed bled into one another in a monotonous haze of beige walls, bland food served on plastic trays, and the hollow echo of television game shows from the common room. I was adrift in a sea of forced cheerfulness and quiet, screaming despair. My initial attempts to fight, to reason with the staff, were met with condescending smiles and brisk notations in my chart about agitation, disorientation, and resistance to care. I quickly saw how the insidious system worked. The more I protested my sanity, the crazier I appeared. Any display of righteous anger was a symptom. Any logical argument was proof of confusion. So I stopped. I became quiet, compliant, a model resident. I ate what I was given. I took the little paper cups of pills they offered without question, and I perfected a vague, empty smile. From the outside, I was a woman succumbing to her fate, another sad, forgettable story in a building full of them. My son and his wife had won. They had successfully, efficiently erased me. But in the long, silent hours of the night, when the only sound was the distant hum of the industrial floor polisher and the rustle of nurses' shoes on the linoleum, something else was happening. A different Evelyn emerged. I asked a kind night nurse, a young woman with gentle eyes named Maria, for a notebook and a pen. I'd like to write down some of my memories, I told her, my voice a carefully constructed whisper of frailty. You know, before I lose them for good. She brought me a cheap, spiral-bound pad and a ballpoint pen, her expression full of genuine sympathy for the poor, confused old woman trying to hold onto the vestiges of her life. She thought she was giving me a tool for reminiscence. In reality, she was handing me a weapon. That notebook became my sanctuary and my armory. By day, I was the docile Mrs. Reed, nodding and smiling. By night, I was an archivist of my own life, a forensic accountant of my own betrayal. My past work as a bookkeeper for my husband's small construction business, a skill I hadn't used in years, came flooding back. With a clarity that frightened even me, I forced my mind through the fog of shock and medication to recall every detail. The exact date I had refinanced the house after David's death, ensuring only my name was on the new title. The account number of a long-forgotten investment portfolio my late husband had started for me with a small inheritance, a portfolio Ethan knew nothing about, which had been quietly growing for 25 years under a wealth management firm in a different state. I sketched the layout of my safe deposit box from memory and listed its contents: bearer bonds, my mother's jewelry, the original deed to the house. I wrote down the names of old friends, business associates of my husband, people with influence, people who knew me not as a frail old woman, but as Evelyn Reed, sharp and capable. Was I preserving my memories before they faded, or was I documenting a crime? At first, the lines were blurry. The act of writing was an act of defiance, a way to prove to myself that the woman they were trying to bury was still very much alive. Each fact I wrote down was a stone, and I was slowly, patiently, building a fortress against the flood of their lies. The world of Willow Creek was a purgatory of hushed tragedies. I met Arthur, the history professor whose story mirrored my own. We would sit in the garden together, not speaking much, but finding solace in our shared, unspoken predicament. One day, his son visited, and I watched from my window as the son guided his father's hand across a document. Arthur returned to the bench a broken man. "It's done," he whispered, his eyes vacant. I gave him the house. It's better for everyone. 2 weeks later, Arthur was gone, transferred to a less expensive, state-funded facility now that his assets were gone. His story was a cautionary tale that hardened my resolve into something sharp and dangerous. I would not be Arthur. My salvation came from an unexpected source. My grandson, Liam. He was 16, a quiet, observant boy with my husband's thoughtful eyes. He loved me, I knew that, but he was a teenager caught in his parents' orbit. His first few visits were awkward, supervised by Chloe, who would answer my questions for him. But Liam was a product of my raising too. He was smarter than they gave him credit for. One evening, Maria, the kind nurse, slipped a note into my hand as she gave me my medication. It was from Liam. "Grandma, I don't believe them. Dad's been acting weird. Found some of your mail in his desk. He said he was handling it. I think something's wrong. I'll tape my old burner phone under the bench in the West Garden tomorrow. Be careful." The note was a jolt of electricity to my heart. I was not alone. I had an ally. The next day, feigning a desire for fresh air, I found the phone. That night, for the first time in months, I heard my grandson's voice, a hushed whisper from his bedroom. "Grandma? Are you there?" We had an open line to the outside world. The game had changed. Weeks turned into 2 months. I played my part beautifully. I made a lopsided macrame plant hanger in arts and crafts that the staff cooed over. I smiled and nodded during the painfully cheerful sing-alongs. I was fading just as they had intended. My file was thick with notes about my placid, compliant nature. And then, one Tuesday morning, during my allotted phone time in the public room, I didn't call Ethan. I dialed a different number, one I had pulled from the depths of my memory and written on the first page of my sacred notebook. It felt like a shot in the dark, a message in a bottle thrown into a vast, uncaring ocean. Jessica Pierce's office. The voice was crisp, young, and professional. "May I speak with her, please?" I asked, my voice a carefully constructed whisper of old-age frailty. "My name is Evelyn Reed." There was a pause. I could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard. "I'm sorry, I don't see a current client by that name." "No, I wouldn't be," I said softly. "I was a client of hers many years ago. Through my late husband, David Reed. It's a personal matter of some urgency." One moment. The hold music was a bland classical tune, designed to soothe, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. The entire fragile structure of my secret plan rested on this one call. "This is Jessica." Her voice was exactly as I remembered, sharp, impatient, all business. "Jessica," I began, letting my voice tremble slightly, a performance I had rehearsed 100 times in my head. "My name is Evelyn Reed, David Reed's wife. I'm sorry to bother you. I'm in a place called Willow Creek. My son, he put me here. He says I'm confused." "Confused about what?" she asked, her tone already shifting from professional impatience to sharp curiosity. "About everything, apparently," I said, a tear I didn't have to fake rolling down my cheek. "He's taken over my house. My accounts. He says I'm not fit to make my own decisions anymore." I've been writing things down, Jessica, trying to remember. But it's all so jumbled in my head. I don't know what's real and what's not anymore. This was the most important performance of my life. I wasn't a vengeful woman seeking a lawyer. I was a lost, confused, heartbroken victim, reaching out for the only lifeline I could remember. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her brilliant mind. "Mrs. Reed," Jessica said finally, her voice now low and serious, stripped of all its earlier impatience. "Don't say another word about this to anyone there. Not the staff, not the other residents. No one. What is the address of this facility? I'm coming to see you tomorrow morning. And Evelyn, bring your notebook." When Jessica Pierce walked into the chintz-curtained visiting room of Willow Creek the next day, she was a bolt of lightning in a beige world. Dressed in a razor-sharp navy suit, she exuded an aura of expensive, lethal competence that made the facility's staff visibly nervous. She listened intently as I recounted my story, my voice soft and hesitant, just as I'd rehearsed. I presented my precious notebook not as a battle plan, but as the desperate, fragmented scribblings of a woman trying to hold on to her own mind before it slipped away entirely. I watched her as she turned the pages, her sharp eyes scanning the dates, the names, the account numbers from my bookkeeping days. Her expression slowly changed from professional sympathy to a focused, predatory stillness. She closed the notebook and placed it gently on the table between us. She looked at me, and in that moment, I allowed the mask of the fragile victim to slip. I let her see the steel beneath, the cold, calculating fire I had kept hidden for months. She saw it. "Evelyn," she said, her voice a low, dangerous hum. "You are not confused. You have been methodically, systematically, and with profound arrogance, illegally robbed. This isn't a journal. This is an indictment." And with this, she tapped the cover of the notebook. "We're not just getting your life back. We are going to strategically dismantle his." The legal assault was swift and silent, a masterpiece of corporate warfare. Our strategy sessions, held in that same visiting room over the following weeks, were exhilarating. Jessica would explain the law, and I would provide the ammunition from my memory and my notebook. We were a formidable team. She hired a private investigator, a former cop named Frank, whose reports, delivered to Jessica and then relayed to me by Liam in our nightly calls, became a new, delicious chapter in my journal. Subject A, Ethan, and Subject B, Chloe, had a loud verbal altercation on their front lawn regarding a credit card statement. One report read, "Subject B was observed leaving the residence with 2 suitcases. Liam confirmed it. "Chloe's been staying at a hotel," he whispered over the phone. "They fight all the time about money." The legal motions landed on them like precision airstrikes. An emergency motion to revoke the forged power of attorney. A petition to freeze all accounts. A formal complaint for elder exploitation. Each step was accompanied by an affidavit from me, drafted by Jessica, painting a heart-wrenching picture of a confused mother being manipulated by her greedy son. The final, brilliant move was the court-ordered partition sale of the house. To facilitate my desperate need for funds to cover my long-term institutional care, the very care they had forced me into. The irony was a dish I savored in my quiet room. I walked out of Willow Creek on a crisp autumn day, not as a rescued victim, but as a liberated general. The first phase of the war was over. I moved into a quiet, respectable, and completely anonymous apartment complex across town, letting the world believe I was a woman slowly rebuilding her life after a devastating family tragedy. I let Ethan and Chloe lick their wounds, sell my house, and move into a small, sad rental in a less prestigious neighborhood. They thought the worst was over. They thought I had taken my pound of flesh and retreated into a quiet, lonely old age. They had no idea that I had just finished setting the board for the real game. One sunny afternoon, I called Jessica. "It's time to go house hunting," I said, my voice strong and clear. We looked at several properties. Then, my realtor, a kind man completely unaware of the intricate drama, called with a new listing. "It's a lovely place, Evelyn. Just came on the market," he said. "The only thing is, and this might be a deal breaker, it's right next door to a rental on Crestview Lane. A family named Reed lives there." There was a long, charged pause. I looked across the table at Jessica in the cafe where we were meeting. She saw the truth in my eyes for the very first time. She saw the scope of it, the chilling patience, the entirety of the long, silent game I had been playing since the day I picked up that notebook. A slow smile, one of pure, unadulterated, professional admiration, spread across her face. I turned my attention back to the phone. "No, Mark," I said, my voice as clear and cold as a winter morning. "It's not awkward at all. It's perfect. I'll take it. And I'll be paying in cash." The day I moved in was the day my revenge truly began. The legal battle was just the prelude. This was the opera. I didn't unpack boxes first. I had a brand new, comfortable wicker armchair delivered, placed it on my new front porch, which had a perfect, unobstructed, panoramic view directly into their kitchen and living room, and I sat. An hour later, Ethan stepped out of his front door to take out the trash. He looked tired, frayed at the edges, the swagger gone. He saw me, and he froze, the trash bag slipping from his grasp. The look of utter, soul-shattering disbelief on his face was more satisfying than any court victory, more valuable than any bank account. I gave him a small, serene smile and a little wave. He flinched as if stung, turned, and scurried back inside like a cockroach exposed to the light. My revenge was not a single, explosive act. It was a slow, creeping vine of psychological warfare. It was a campaign with multiple fronts. Front 1. Social annihilation. I reintroduced myself to the neighborhood, not as the woman whose son had her put away, but as a charming, resilient widow starting a new chapter. I hosted a garden party, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses wafting over the fence into their silent, curtain-drawn house. I joined the neighborhood watch. I donated a handsome park bench to the community green space, right in front of their house, with a small plaque that read, "In loving memory of David Reed, a man who believed in community." I systematically won the hearts of the very people they had once tried to poison against me. Front 2. The wedge. I used my knowledge of their weaknesses to drive a wedge between them. Knowing Chloe's obsession with status, I would have lavish floral arrangements delivered to my house, in full view of her kitchen window. I accidentally told a chatty neighbor that I was so glad Ethan had kept his father's love for classical music, a passion Chloe despised, which led to arguments over the music they played. Liam would report back on the escalating tension, his voice a mixture of awe and fear. Front 3. The reclaiming of Liam. This was the most important front. Liam began spending his weekends with me. We worked in my new garden. I taught him the family recipes his father had forgotten and his mother had never learned. I told him stories about his grandfather, rebuilding the family history that had been erased. He was not a pawn, he was my legacy. Watching him laugh and thrive in my home, while Ethan watched from his window, was the cruelest cut of all. The final confrontation came on a gray Saturday morning. He appeared on my porch, looking like a man who had aged a decade in a few months. He was alone. "Why?" was all he could manage, his voice raspy. "Why what, Ethan?" I asked calmly, not rising from my chair. "Why do I live in a house I purchased legally? Why do I spend time with my only grandson?" "You're torturing us," he whispered. I finally stood and faced him, my calm a terrifying counterpoint to his anguish. "No," I said, my voice soft, but laced with granite. "Let me be precise. You tried to erase me. You and your wife conspired to steal my home, my assets, and my identity. You committed a felony. You left me in a room to fade away, telling yourself it was an act of kindness. That was torture, Ethan. What I am doing now," I gestured to my beautiful, blooming garden, to my peaceful home, "is living. And my happiness is the one consequence you never anticipated." He tried to apologize, to make excuses, but I cut him off. "Your apologies are worthless. They are just more words from a man whose words have no value. The only thing I want from you is for you to look at me every day and remember what you did. Remember that you underestimated me." I went back inside and closed the door, leaving him standing on my porch, a ghost in the ruins of the life he had torched himself. I didn't feel hatred. I didn't even feel triumph. I felt a vast, quiet, and profound peace. The peace of a story that had finally been given its proper ending, written in my own hand.